Well, hi everyone. This is Kathie from The Quiet Rebellion, and we have Elisa from Apple Turnover with us today. How are you, Elisa?
Very well. How are you doing?
I am great, thank you. And we are going to talk. I am a subscriber to Elisa's newsletter, her Substack, which is great, and we will include the link for everyone to subscribe. And she had written a particular episode newsletter edition that spoke to me, and it was about routines because I am a lover of routine. But the way it was written, Elisa's newsletters are so great. You should definitely sign up. They're just wonderfully written. So I reached out to her about talking to us about routine. So we will include your links. And the first thing I guess I wanted to ask you, even though I'm a big fan of routine, is how do you see the establishment of routine as an important part of quietly rebelling from kind of the current hustle culture that we're all so like in our faces all the time?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can use routine to hustle.
Right. No, that's
Definitely.
true. That's true. That's true.
Definitely. But it's I think finding the routines that actually are supporting how you want to live and what you need, like supporting your whole being and your purpose. And like I think all of that, if you don't have it in a routine, it just can be really easy to lose it. It can be really easy to be pushed by whatever dominant culture is telling you to do, which is a lot. And it can just be really difficult to carve out any time for the things that actually really matter, or for supporting yourself in the middle of a really intense time. I think that hustling is like, yeah, you can structure your hustling, but you could structure your rest, and you can structure your creativity. You can structure, and my experience is that if I don't, I lose something. There's always something popping out the top that's like, I haven't been resting,
Yes.
or I haven't been creating anything, or I've just been working.
Right. So, and that was something that really stuck out to me because, of course, we often talk about routine as a way to be more productive in terms of making more money, which,
Yes.
okay, so I'm not here to talk about that because, there's plenty of podcast bros that will gladly talk to you about that, and girl boss and whatever. And I'm not opposed to any of that. Obviously, we all have to have an income at some point. But the thing that struck me the most was you wrote about it in a way of creating space so that you could live simply and indulge in your creative passions and include rest and those kinds of things. So how did you get there? Like, because I'm assuming it was kind of a gradual process. Like, it didn't happen overnight, because it never does. Nothing, every overnight success is a million years in progress, right?
I know. My eldest is turning 25 this year.
Wow.
And I think I began to understand about routine very slowly, but beginning with when I had my first baby, because we we just like slept all these crazy hours. This was one of those babies that doesn't want to sleep. And so every day looked different. But actually, when I look at my life, every day did look different. I'm an artist by training. I'm a child of an artist. I kind of lived in that world, and it's very spontaneous. And that can work when you're single and you're a student. But when you have a kid, wow, it got really bonkers. And just managing a space, same thing. So Fly Lady was my first inroad into ritual.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I just was in total chaos. There were like important documents mixed up with piles of other stuff.
Right.
And as I say, like, you never knew when you would wake up or when you would sleep or whatever. It was just all over the place. But it wasn't really until like my second child actually did want to sleep at night. I was astonished. And that helped me. Like, my babies actually settled me into routine. Once the eldest stopped napping, then that was actually really, really steadying routine. And I had to find places for my work, for my art practice. And so I would kind of pick that up all over. But I do think that ADHD was going on from the beginning, and I didn't recognize that. I'm one of these late, I think a lot of us are like, oh, wait a minute.
I
is
think it's
happening.
especially true for women because I think it presents differently. I've been reading, but yeah.
It presents differently, and the low dopamine that happens with ADHD happens with perimenopause.
Mm-hmm.
And so it really wasn't until the last few years that things really went off the rails for me, and I just couldn't keep things in order without some greater structure. Yeah. And then also moving to this farm, and it's coming up to 9 years. As soon as you have animals, even just a pet, they lock you in. They give you that consistency. Although, to be honest, my cat would eat at any hour.
Right. Yeah. Well,
But the
pets
birds,
are a whole different world. Yeah.
the raccoons would also eat.
Right.
And so you have to have them in bed. So that, like, the power of those structures, those rituals, and just what the land is always telling you, it's like I needed to be grounded in those things. But recognizing the ADHD, then I look at the productivity stuff, which I love. I am actually like super keen on it.
Mm-hmm.
But I use it more as a way to open up space and to maintain a foundation from which to stand on, from which to be, to be living simply, so I can actually, cook the meals. But I can't cook the meals if I haven't cleaned the kitchen.
Right.
And my instincts are to edit the film or write the piece and get totally lost in the project out on the farm and forget that we even eat dinner ever,
Right.
that's ever been a thing.
Yeah.
So I really, I'm writing about it partly because I need constant reminders of like, okay, this is how we actually can be intentional rather than constantly putting out fires. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the thing I think that gets lost a lot when we talk about routine. People tend to think, I don't get to be spontaneous or whatever. But what does end up happening a lot of times is that we lose all intentionality because everything becomes spontaneous. And then what ends up happening is we do whatever. We go for a 4-hour walk, which I'm not like, that's great. Go for definitely be spontaneous sometimes, but there becomes a point where you lose all intentionality and you just willy-nilly through life. And that might be okay, but then it also sometimes means that we're not really valuing or honoring our priorities, which could be a lot of different things. It could be creative work, it could be our families, it could be whatever. But if we don't have some routine, I found in my life, then it becomes really disorganized fast and devolves. And eventually I will start to get really cranky because I feel like I have no sense of control over anything, right? And we only have very little control over life. Right? So what I want to control a little bit of what I can. So yeah.
Yeah, I really agree with this. I just I would work on a project and everything else would fall apart.
Right.
And this still happens, but
sure.
Part of how I use productivity is often to, for example, pair a project with a foundational task. So I'm doing the morning chores, I'm letting the animals out, but while I'm out there, I might tag on a couple of less regular tasks that are foundational. So I'll bring in some firewood and bring in a new compost bucket, but I will have like a project that I will pair. But I've been tidying my garage, and that's not something I want to do all day long. It doesn't feel like creativity, but it's a project, and it's so supportive to everything else and to me creating a space where I can actually function better.
Right.
And like paring down, decluttering, organizing, so other people can help me more, so I can just find my tools when I need to.
Right.
So then I might do, like, I have an agreement to just do 5 minutes. 5 minutes of tidying usually turns into half an hour while I send a voice note to my friend in England. And then that project gets done. And then that's another foundation laid. I don't have to worry about paring that down. I'm just maintaining it. And now maybe I can actually spend more time and turn my attention to a bigger project like a film or a carpentry project or something like that.
Right. Right.
Right. And so those are like, it's sort of like taking my little animal self and like just guiding it a little bit more. Like, okay, if we do some of this, and then I'll go and scribble and write for like an hour after that. But I've done those basics, and that, because I will forget to like eat or dress or
Right.
things like that. Like, I think ADHD is a powerful side quest. To me, when I heard side quest, it was like, oh, that's me. Everything is.
Yeah.
And in fact, I have to say, I find routine things like doing the dishes incredibly dull.
Right.
And I didn't really understand that it was like painfully, debilitatingly dull. And
Yeah.
so I needed then to add novelty. I always need to add novelty. So I'll put on jazz music and be dancing as I'm cooking, or I'll have a call with my kid who's woofing in Japan, and we'll go and organize something. Yeah, face something that's like, ooh, because it's easy for me to pick up the projects. Those are fun and new, and I get carried away. And I want to be carried away and turn around and go, oh, isn't it good that I made a double meal yesterday? And so dinner's already made and the kitchen's already clean, so that I'm allowed to hyper focus, because I want, like, that hyper focus is where the writing comes from and the filmmaking comes from.
Right. That's really great. And I think that one of the things that you wrote about was that sometimes, I think you used the word doldrums. I always say drudgery, right? Routine can see, like, dishes can feel like drudgery. I actually quite like to do dishes. It's a weird thing. I don't know. I have since I was a kid. There's something about it I like to do, but I wash dishes. I don't dry, right? Like, they just sit in the rack. And then when they air dry, then I put them away. My maternal grandmother used to say, we let God dry, which I've always just loved. Like, we don't, so it's something that's always stuck with me.
I like washing dishes too, but I find it very difficult to start.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. And okay. So yeah, we all have our things, right? Like, I was talking to someone else on the podcast recently, Lisa, and we were talking about ironing, and she's like, I don't iron anything ever. And I was like, yeah, I really don't either. It has to be like, if I'm ironing, generally it's like a creative project, like a quilting project where I need to press the seams, right? Or like if I'm taking a photograph of something and I do want that linen to not be wrinkly because it won't be as visually appealing.
Ironing, it's an interesting one. I wonder if it has to do with the fibers that we wear and just how casual our clothing has become, that ironing, for me, that doesn't, I wouldn't even know what do I have to iron. Maybe like a nice frock, but when do I wear that?
I do have a linen dress that wrinkles like crazy,
exactly,
right?
linen.
But and I hardly ever, and obviously it's something I don't wear terribly often, but yeah, it wrinkles terribly. But even if I iron it, it's going to be wrinkly in 20 minutes after I wear it. So,
and I think what you're talking about is also something to do with the standards of what our houses should be and our clothing should be, that thankfully I think that's really starting to shift. And I think so I keep trying to shift it for myself too. Like, I think we went off the deep end with a lot of these things. And I regularly follow folks who talk about paring down, partly because when the space is pared down, I can maintain it easily. When my clothing is pared down, I can keep it up to scratch. And I wear the simplest possible clothing.
Yeah, me too.
So that I don't have to be dealing with it all the time. And so that I can deal with things that other people would say, well, that's where I would save the time. Like, I don't want to be microwaving a meal that came in plastic and is totally out of season. I want to get on my milling bike and bake the bread.
Right.
I want to make the yogurt. I'm not doing either of those things right now because I'm doing a lot of other things. But those are always like, I know when I come back to those practices, that's actually how I want to live.
Right.
Yeah.
And you brought up an interesting point that made me think about, there is this idea of like keeping up with the Joneses or keeping up with social media or whatever. Like, I happened to come across a video recently that was like this whole like ridiculous like organizing like the refrigerator kind of thing. It was just so over the top. And that's fine. Like, if that's what she wants to do, bless her heart, go for it. But for me, that I don't want to keep up with that. And I don't want to keep up with some sort of weird standard that's in a magazine that I have to like, or on TV or whatever, where my linens, like, I have to iron my sheets, my bed sheets. I'm never going to do it. Never, ever. Because I would rather use my time for something else. And I think that's a really important part of rebelling against the current mainstream society, and also just living very intentionally. We all have to choose. We all have very limited time. And so we have to just choose. We can't do everything, but we can do a lot of things, but we have to choose which we want to do. So yeah, I think that's really, really
definitely knowing why. why are you doing the thing? And I think as a woman in this culture, and
Yes.
like daughter of women who grappled with their roles, my maternal grandmother ran her own house and then someone else's, and she was incredibly good at it. She was very fast. She would iron everything in a stack. She'd have the sheets and the towels at the bottom, so they got ironed underneath everything. She was super efficient. The standards were extreme. Her own standards were extreme. But my mother wanted to be an artist, right? And, she was teaching art, and then she stayed home with us, which was pretty radical even in the 70s.
Yeah.
But to have an art practice around the back of 3 kids, but she was still trying to maintain standards of how clean and how perfect in all the meals and all of that. And she had to drop some, but there's lots of like shame about it. Like you've got to have it all going. And for me, I can even see with my kids, part of why I did Fly Lady is I didn't want to be martyred. I didn't want to be a martyr about keeping things clean and tidy. And I wanted it to be fast so that these other callings were the priority. And so then for me, I think part of what my practice has actually become is like, it's almost you can't differentiate between the making the household of running the farm and the making the films and the activism around how we live. Like they're all inextricable. And that's because I think how we live can be an activism and is actually one of the most important activisms. Yes. And as soon as we are saying, I'm going to simplify my clothing so it takes less time, well, then you're looking at clothing that lasts longer because you don't want to be replacing it and you want to be able to mend it. So you need some skills. Yes. So you need to look at your fiber content. And all of a sudden, you've just done 6 different things in 6 different directions that are all a form of activism that helps many different aspects of the crises that we're in. Right. Where it's not consumerism. Right. And it's not exploitative. And it's you don't have to earn as much money if you're not buying as much stuff that it looks cheap. But not when you have to buy it 17 times. Right, exactly.
It's a very powerful, I've always believed this and I've written about it a lot, that I think everything you do at home ripples out, everything. And so it is a really powerful resistance and rebellion. It's a quiet form of rebellion, which may feel really good. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't be active in other forms of activism if you can and have the ability, right? Like go to the protests, do the phone calls, do all of that. But also remember that being quiet at home can go a really long way into changing everything around you. Even if I think sometimes we feel like it has to ripple out across the whole world, but really if it can just ripple out in your own local community, the amount of change that can happen just right there is huge.
You're giving me chills. Yeah. And actually, if all I did was let my kids live a life where they stayed connected to who they are and to their creativity and saw that their relationship with money, with belongings, with their bodies, with food, that they could negotiate it and take that with them when they move to a city, take it with them when they're traveling. Just those deeper values, when you live them, other people can too. Right. It just makes it more possible. And it looks small, but I think we look at lots of things that are small and look back and say, well, that was really impactful. That changed everything. It's small, but it does reverberate. You're giving permission every time you keep it a little simpler and you don't demand as much of yourself, and you can invite people into a space that isn't just is running on a different set of values. Yeah, like that. And I do think that the power of consumerist culture with an advertising budget is much bigger than mine. It's something that you do, every one of us doing a little bit in this direction. It really matters. It really adds up.
It does. And one of the things you kind of mentioned was about taking care of the animals and things you do in the morning and whatever. And I obviously I talk a lot about living close to the earth and living seasonally. And I think you can do that no matter where you live. I think you can do that if you're living on a farm or if you're living smack dab in the middle of the city. It's different. Obviously, it's very different. But I think you can do it. I think finding a seasonal rhythm is really important and not as mysterious. Somehow it has become like this really mysterious thing. I think that's marketing, right? Because everybody wants you to buy like their course or whatever. But I don't think that it needs to be. So how do you have tips for someone to try and like capture that kind of seasonal rhythm, no matter where they live? Do you have any tips for people? Because I feel like that
I
helps.
had to do it. I certainly didn't grow up with it. I was living in suburbia. It was a beautiful, mountain and ocean suburbia, but still, like there was no food production there. There was no production of any kind there. And people were encouraged to buy everything they needed. My parents were composting and they had some food they were growing, but just a little bit. It still mattered, but when you live in a city and you, especially the grocery store, I think that was the thing that was kind of the barrier for me. If you haven't lived in tune with seasons, you might not have a clue what is in season.
Right.
And it's really difficult to find out. At the time, I was living in London, and what helped was we got a food box delivered, and so they were selling what was in season. And I remember I still have this tea towel that they actually sold that had illustrations of the months and what was in season. And I tried to memorize it, which is just such a difficult way to go about this reconnection. And I mean, that a lot of what I've had to do, my kids don't have to do because they just live it. And I've just been doing it with them. So they get that immersion, but I didn't have that. I had to reconnect it. It was totally broken. I had no idea why it said you could eat a cabbage almost year round. Like, why is that? I didn't know why. And even when I moved to the farm first summer, like we moved in the middle of harvest season, and there were all these pears. And I put them into, we have a root cellar, but we're on the West Coast. It's not cold in there. It's like cool. And the pears rotted. Like I was just running like crazy. I didn't even know, like, what is this tree? Oh, it's a walnut. What do I do with this food? But that was like an instant immersion. Like, these are not keeper pears. These are not winter pears. They are not going to keep. You have to preserve them now. I didn't know that was a thing. And it's really hard to know what you're dealing with, backwards like that. If you've lived with it and then you go to the city, you can carry it with you. But if you're rebuilding it, so I hear about folks, I was lucky in London. I did have a garden, but even just going to the same spot, if you have access, and a lot of people don't, but if you have access to a place with plants, and you can park, you could just go there regularly and just observe, just smell it and sit there and listen. I think those are the things. I don't have to do that because I walk my goats every afternoon and I go out to tend the animals morning and evening. And so I'm steeped in it.
Right.
You're like, this is really early spring and this is a really wet spring. And this time last year, this was happening. But I think we can find those things, even if it's just a house plant. Like, why is my Easter cactus already? What does it think is happening in the world right now? So those are, I think, food. If you can reconnect, if you can go to a farmer's market, even if you only just buy one thing because it's expensive, which unfortunately they often are. But I think that kind of immersion is great. And then also just in the day, for me, one of the things that's really helped was to become more attuned to the hours, and I am more and more an early bird. So noticing when the sun's coming up, noticing what phase of the moon we're in. All of those tiny things, you could bring those into your life from anywhere. Just like, when is it getting dark? Do I get tired if I don't have screens on? Yeah, those little bits, and I think that they are physically, like, they start something, and it grows.
And I agree. I really notice. Now I live in Northwest Montana, and I live pretty far north. So the way the sunlight plays, right? Like I really notice it, because in the winter, I have like 8 hours of daylight. So, but then I have like 20 in the summer. So I have, you know what I mean? So I really notice that, and I think I know that might not be true for everybody based on where you live, right? Like the sunlight, it might not be that extreme, the change, but I feel like when you notice that is a really grounding thing.
Yeah.
And if you think about those hours, that the light, and if we didn't have all of modern technology to distract you, your life would be very different, right? You would probably go to bed as soon as it got dark, because you wouldn't want to burn your candles or whatever. I mean, I have a wood stove, so I have light from there, but still that light is not bright. So yeah, you have to, it's a real different way to connect. And I agree, food is one of the best ways to connect, but obviously depending on where you live, that may or may not be a privilege. You know, if you live in a food desert of some sort, then that's really a difficult thing. And I am really blessed. I garden, and I have lived in the same community for 25 years now. And so, and I know a lot of people, I know a lot of other farmers. Like I've really worked hard to build that, like that relationship with farmers and that kind of thing. And that takes time. It does not happen in a day or two. It happens over years.
Yeah, it's a fluency and it's a language. And I think it's really good to be patient with yourself, like understand that you're rebuilding something that almost broke.
Right.
And in places it's completely devastated. And whatever you can do, whatever you can do, like I do think just like, even if you could grow some lettuce, grow some peas in a window, any act of growing, I noticed, you get to know that plant and get to understand what you can do with it. Those are real. For me, I'm extremely blessed. Like I've got all these fruit trees around, and I've got to know them. They're friends, and I've helped restructure how they were built, stabilize them, and understand, like, when are you blossoming, when are you fruiting, what do you need right now? You need some more compost, you need some more wood chips, and those sorts of it could be on a tiny scale. It doesn't have to be your full-time work for it to reconnect you, and then you'll start to see it in your cat, like eating more in the winter and packing it on and adding that fur, and right, those I think those things, they can be tiny. I really love I love that in Waldorf they'll do like a nature table, and I think those sorts of, like, if you're on a walk and there's just what is actually this season, what is happening,
right?
I think those things, even now, I just I get more connected when I'm attuning to it, and it doesn't have to be a lot of time. But if you can even just like turn your lights down, don't have lights on in all of the rooms, so that you really experience that darkness in winter. I did that when we first moved here, and we've never looked back. Like, we don't work hard on things in the evening. It's not the time for doing like bright things. Oh, we'll watch a film. We keep it really simple. Like, that's the time to slow down and quiet down.
Right. Yeah. My husband and I quite often, especially in the winter, watch movies at night, and that's fine. I mean, one movie. I said that like we watch four. We watch one. I'm very much an early riser too. And so, and so bedtime. If you're going to be an early riser, that means you're in bed early, generally speaking, because, your body needs so much sleep. As you get older, your body needs more sleep, y'all.
I'm finding I'm needing.
Are you? I find I sleep. Well, that could be true too. I find I'm up earlier all the time. It seems like, I don't know.
Yeah, I'm up earlier and earlier. Yeah, recently I started sleeping better. I think a lot of changes in my life have happened that are supporting that. So that's great. And part of what happened is I had that night watch, the couple hours in the middle, 2-3 hours where I would be awake. And now I'm kind of going to bed later and getting up really early. And that little night watch is just kind of tiny. I'll read and go back to sleep. And so I've been really grateful for that, because I have to say, talking about routine, it is extremely difficult to manage a routine if you've got insomnia.
Right. And if you're
every
tired,
day you're just trying to cope with and you've got to sleep in a bit, because otherwise you're going to be a zombie. You're going to be a zombie anyway. I had several years of that, and it seems to be resolving a bit. And I noticed, like, yeah, everything is easier. So I do think you have to look at what season you're in. You know, if
Right.
your kids are small, give
Right.
yourself a break. Like, just try to have a little, shift something you already do towards
Right.
simplicity or seasonality. Like, easy now.
It,
We should be doing this with lots of people supporting us, and we're often doing it
alone, right? Right. And that is true. We do have to recognize the seasons of our, just like the earth has seasons, our lives have seasons. There are, seasons if you have small children versus when you have teenagers or you're an empty nester is very different, and it should look very different. And I think sometimes the society in general makes it seem like it should never look different, but obviously it should
Yeah.
look very different.
Yeah, and I would say as a woman, it's, you cannot ignore it because you
Right.
have physically gone through seasons. Even if you don't have kids,
Yeah.
you have seasons in your body that you cannot ignore.
Yes.
As much as culture would refuse to talk about what's going on
Yeah.
as you move through your life. And I find that, that alone, I think attuning to what you need as opposed to, and I just don't think anyone is built to be the machine that we're being extracted from at this point in
Right.
capitalism.
I
Late
know.
stage
Yes.
is like, yeah, you could work constantly and it wouldn't be enough because you're just feeding a machine that's feeding billionaires. You're not going to
Right.
be able to ever really do enough. And that's where I think the rebellion of needing less is like,
Right.
okay, let's just back out of this agreement
Right.
that we seem to have had. And if I'm not plugged into all of that consumption, if I'm actually content, super
Wait, and isn't that
powerful.
like a huge rebellion? Just the idea of contentment in this society these days, where we're just like, everybody always wants more, 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 more. But I can honestly just say, I really don't. I really don't want any more than what I have. But I admit, obviously, I'm in a place of pretty great privilege, right? own my home. I don't have any debt, that kind of thing. And yeah, sure, I could go further into debt. I could go into debt and buy a bigger piece of property, perhaps. You know what I mean? Or a bigger house. But why? I'm really content with what I have. And I think in a society that's always kind of needling it, if you're paying attention to marketing at all, it is always telling you that you are not enough.
You're not enough and you need to fix it by getting more. And actually, I've been noticing how much it fixes when I'm sharing more and I'm owning less and like sharing not just what I have, but like sharing the labor. And suddenly these things are really, really fun. Other people find it really, really fun to do tasks that I just do regularly. And when we do, it's a party. And like, that's when you get an insight. Like, we have this really intense story of progress that is just wrong. It's just frankly wrong. Like, this is a really hard time to be alive. This is really, really alienated. It's really dissociated. It's really upsetting and scary a lot of the time. And anything that we can do to reconnect and simplify and like build community in those places where, as soon as you build it, then you realize, oh, this is much easier. This is much more fun. And I don't need much because what was missing wasn't the stuff. It was the people.
Right. The connection.
It was the land. It was like being in my body in a way that's not critical, but actually, sensual and participating.
Right. Right.
Like eating the food from this moment on the land is one of the biggest pleasures. It's like,
oh, I know.
And it is a huge privilege, and it shouldn't be.
Right.
Like, I think that's the thing, like recognizing what we think is privilege. Like, it shouldn't be privileged to eat vegetables without toxins in them. And it shouldn't be privileged to have time to bake your bread or
or have food at all. Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. I participate a lot in my local food charity. And so I'm just constantly amazed. I live in a very small town and I'm constantly amazed at the amount of food insecurity there is. And it's a horrible thing. And so, we do what we can. But yeah, so I agree. Yeah. And it is. And what a rebellious thing to just be like, I am going to be content. And then I'm also going to share whatever I can. And I think one of the things that we do a lot in this society is because you had mentioned people helping or coming and participating in labor with you, because we have this idea of rugged individualism, which is never very individual, actually.
You wouldn't last a day.
No.
You wouldn't.
But generally, it's not really individual. It's only, you can be a rugged individual as long as you look and do what we do, is generally how people are, because you can't have purple hair and be a rugged, anyway, I'm sidetracking, because I feel like it's never very individual. And yes, you would never survive because we need community. But I think we have this idea where we can't allow people to help us with our routines and our rituals. And we have to unlearn that. And I am still unlearning that often in my own life. And my husband is really good at this. Just asking people if he doesn't know how to do something or doesn't have a skill, he just asks.
Amazing.
And like I know, right? And he has taught me so much about just doing that. And he's always like, what's the worst they can do is say no. And like that gives me a lot of confidence in a lot of things I do in my life. But it's true. And so I'm constantly trying to remind myself, you just have to ask. Because when people ask me, I hardly ever say no unless I really truly can't do something, right? Or I
know, I'm delighted.
I know, me too.
I think one of the best things that I did to kind of inadvertently is when we got rid of our car. As soon as we decided we were just going to ride electric bikes, and we got a cargo bike so I could put a kid on the back.
Oh, yeah.
And that works a lot of the time. It works a lot of the time, but it doesn't work all the time. And in those moments, you need to ask for help.
Right.
I mean, you can throw money at it. And my beloved neighbor, Buddhist and just salt of the earth, he will say to me, and we have this conversation regularly, we almost don't even say very many words to each other when we have this conversation because we know what the other person means. We'll say, folks these days, they've got too much money and they don't ask for community to help. And when he was my age, if people were building something, they would just get together and build it together.
Yep.
But if you can pay someone and then you get a contractor and you've done it all kind of by yourself, that contractor isn't someone you're calling up on the weekend saying, hey, how's your kid doing? Do you need me to bring around some soup? Like what you want is to actually ask for help, because when you ask, you open the door for them to ask. Then you start sharing tools. Then you start sharing rides. I have multiple people now after 7 years not having a car who will get to a shop and they'll send me a text, give me a call, say, hey, do you need anything? And they understand that this isn't just like them helping me.
Right.
Which does feel like I'm asking too much if you look at it that way. What they're saying is this is a whole energy expenditure. They've taken a vehicle to the car with precious fossil fuels, right? They've taken the time to do that. Why not make that super efficient? Help out a neighbor. I don't have to go out. I can save some time. Next time, maybe I will do it for them or do something else for someone else, right? And they drop it in my bin and I've left some eggs for them or whatever it is. And it doesn't have to be like measuring it all.
Right.
Because it actually, when you relax into it, like it does come around. And that sort of non-monetary exchange, that kind of collaborative economy is total rebellion.
It is.
And it is world building.
Yes. It is. And it takes a lot, especially because we have all been so conditioned to unlearn the idea that you have to do it yourself. And it's progress, not perfection. Sometimes you're going to do it really well, and other times you're going to just fumble over it and you're going to be thinking about it.
I'm actually terrible at this. Like I have to say, I'm really terrible at this. I'm constantly lifting something that's too heavy for me.
Right.
Or planning a project and there's someone right there who could totally help me with it, and I'll just power through.
I know.
That it's in your brain, it's in your life, and you've got to just be like washing it away. Are
you the oldest child too?
No, I'm a middle child, but
See, I have the oldest child where I can do it all myself. Thank you very much. And I don't, and so I'm learning that because it is not conducive to community in any way. It just serves to cut you off because you're not allowing people in and you're not,
and folks
you don't give space for them. Yes.
Like that is actually really like having a farm. This is what, my kid's been woofing, and we're really excited whenever we've met anyone who's, I don't know if you've woofing if
Yeah,
anyone's heard
willing
of it.
workers on organic farms. Yeah.
Yeah, so folks coming around volunteering, you often will feed them, give them somewhere to sleep, maybe just for a few days.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of sharing it's profound. And it's, just even having an opportunity to be in a different space and feel what it's like. Like, I think that's so valuable. There have been so many moments in my life where I would have really loved it if I'd had someone there. So I have a farm stay, and sometimes I have folks come for a mentorship, and it can look really simple, but just if you make the sauerkraut with a person and you can ask the questions you have in that moment, you learn it in a different way than if you try to struggle through and understand a book and understand even a video. Like, it's just such a great thing to have, to just like get it immersed in a place and kind of go, okay, that's that's what this is like, and recognize all the ways you don't realize. Like, folks they don't understand like the life cycle of a chicken, or they don't understand like, how are the goats in milk, or what, like, why is this apple not a keeper? Those are things that you kind of have to be with.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, when we share more and don't just try to do it alone,
gatekeep it all. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It actually, this is how we increase the fluency for other people. And I consider that activism as well, as like, just opening the door.
Right. I agree. I think that it's just, and the idea, I know we started very much talking about routine, and we've gotten all kinds of other really wonderful stuff, which I love. But I do think, just getting back to the routine, but I think when you keep a sort of loose routine, you're more able to do these things because you're not all over the map. You have more room. Okay, so I know Stephen Covey is kind of like the whole boss kind of guy. But years and years ago, like a long time ago, I was very young. I happened to, I don't know if it was a seminar, I attended something where he kind of was talking about planning, right? And it was just like this idea that if you put all the big stuff in the container first, you have a lot more room for all the other stuff because you've got the big stuff ready. And I think that's really important because, and I know this is even for myself, even for just like, if I want to do something with my community, if I want to even just like bake a pie for the pie auction, I have to make sure I have time and space for that in my life, or it won't happen. And I'm going to be really sorry that I missed the opportunity to do that later. And so I think sometimes just having that allows you to not have regrets. Like they always say, right? No one's on their deathbed and says, I wish I had worked more. And that's true. Yeah. And we have to have that space or we miss out on our community. And for me, that's a big thing. And it's especially a big thing now because we really can't. We have to rely on our community and we have to let our communities rely on us, I think.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting thing because it's like these twin parts. It's like the planning and the routine. And I spend quite a lot of time planning, actually. I do a lot of journaling, and probably half of the journaling is actually kind of reviewing the week, thinking about what's next, what's happening in season, trying to curb my own instincts to do too much.
Right.
Like, what is actually needs to be done right now in this moment and what can wait. But then also having that simplicity and like reducing the requirements so that I can slow down enough that I can do things, really simply. And my electrical bill is much less because I got the wood cured and I can have the firewood, but that's a slow process. But then the power's out and I can cook and I'm really stable. And I've got the laundry hanging at the same time. I don't own a dryer, so I don't have that electrical bill. So I'm reducing the costs. I'm increasing the labor. But in some ways, I've reduced the labor as well because I'm not trying to fund so much complexity.
Right.
And then time is kind of, I don't know. I've noticed it does this interesting kind of slow thing. Like, it's like there's a malleableness that happens because I'm not racing. Even like how the kids learned doing unschooling. So the demands were intrinsic. They weren't like you need to fulfill these external requirements. It was actually like, okay, what are you into? How can I support you to do that? But we didn't have a car, so we couldn't race to 17 different things in the week.
Right.
So you're going much slower. You still find really wonderful possibilities, but it's just like notched right down. And I just noticed like those limits are actually freeing.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, I agree. And I think a lot of people don't see that because we think of limits as being imposed on us and horrible, and they're often really the complete opposite. I think because we cannot have it all, right? We cannot do everything. And I am a person of many interests, right? And especially creatively, you know, I attended a class about mushroom and lichen identification, and it was wonderful. I learned a lot, but I also, and you know, he happened to mention that the one particular turkey tail mushrooms were great for dyeing cloth, and I was like, oh, I should. And then, but I'm like, I don't have time for that. I could do that, but then something else has to go that I also really enjoy doing, and so I don't, and I have to tell myself.
Yeah, and I really love the idea of having seasons for things. So we talked about seasons of life, and you know, I've got a spinning wheel sitting in the corner, and I really want to learn to ply the yarn so I can knit a blanket. But this is not the year for that.
That's right. That's right. And it might be someday.
Year.
Yeah.
It is the year I bought some yarn and I'm making myself a hood so that I've got this extra warmth so that I'm really comfortable living at lots of different temperatures.
Yeah.
And I'm more likely to stay outside for longer. And it's probably something I can wear for life. And so that's, you know, I would love to have spun the yarn for it. And it's not going to happen right now. That's okay. It's enough. And when I have the space, I will pick something up, and actually having folks come in and share the space, work with me. That's actually often when I will do the projects, and it'll just be sitting there and I'll think, oh, and sometimes you get in your head about it, like, oh, that apple cider vinegar has been going for 9 months. Like, it's probably getting better and better, but I should get to it. And usually it's when someone comes to visit and I'll say, hey, what are you into? Do you want to bottle up this cider and make some more? And it's super fun. And then it's done and we'll do something else next time.
Right. Yeah. It's very fun. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. Do you have anything else that you wanted to share with us about routine or for simple living before we get to how people can find you?
Yeah, I just think having a great deal of compassion and for yourself, you know, like really tons of compassion. This is not working because of you, and you're not going to fix it all. And just like, what's the next tiniest thing that you could do that would nourish you and that you could build on? And I think that for me, like, I've been building this way for a long time, and I didn't know how to do almost anything that I do now. It was really from scratch. I had no idea what was in season. I had no idea how to preserve anything. I didn't know how to knit. I didn't know how to take care of an animal. I'd never had a pet. Like, if I can do that, you know, I think it just is, keep it small. Keep it small. Yeah. This is why I call it the small work. Yeah, we just do a little bit more and we grow it.
I think I say this all the time. When I teach canning classes, I say this all the time. Like, when you first start, it will take you all day to do 7 jars of something. All day. Yeah. And it will be exhausting and your kitchen will be a mess. If you keep at it, next year, you'll be able to make 14 jars in a day and bake bread in the same day.
Yeah.
And it won't seem so hard. So the more you do something, and this is true for anything, and I have to tell myself this all the time too, is that, like, just the more you do something, the more efficient you will become. I had made a reel not too long ago because we had the TV on, but we weren't really in the house. Like, it was on, but we were doing stuff, right? In and out, actually. And I happened to hear the guy on the television say, when I was in another room, he said, see, it's not hard. It just takes knowing how. And it was like an old show. It was like a Western. And I thought, that is so true. It's not hard. It just takes knowing how. And that's true for everything. And sometimes we don't know what we don't know. But if you try to figure it out and you ask for help, you will get more efficient and things will get easier. Yeah. And then you can add more things. But you have to start small.
It's work to become fluent. Anytime we've got fluency and we've had an immersion is a huge, huge privilege. Yeah. If someone's just been there showing you, if you had a grandmother, I call the internet my grandmother.
Yeah.
because there's so many repairs that we can do to reconnect. And yeah, you do get better at this, and then you don't even realize all the things that you've put into motion.
And that confidence will just continue. Once you get confident in one thing, that confidence will just bleed over into everything else that you do.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. And I agree. Be so compassionate with yourself, because you will mess up when you're starting something new. Everybody does.
Yeah, that's how you learn. That's the best learning. Oh, I'm
I
never going to
know.
do it that way again.
And because I'm stubborn, right? If I don't get it right the first time, well, we are just going to show you whatever you is, we're going to get it. So yeah, great. Well, Elisa, tell everybody where we can find you online, please.
Yeah, probably the easiest is to go to appleturnover.substack.com, and you'll find films and writing there. And then you can go anywhere else to find me at Apple Turnover as well.
Okay. And we will have all the links in the show notes. So thank you very much for joining me today. I enjoyed this conversation so much.
Oh, me too. Thanks for the invitation. It's really been a pleasure.